Hi there, welcome back. If you're listening while driving, crafting, or just resting for a moment, I'm glad you're here. If you're joining me here through YouTube, this is a long-form spoken podcast meant to be listened to slowly, more like a conversation at the hearth than a fast-paced video. Today we're moving into the end of April and on into May. Winter is gone and spring is in full swing. I thought today we would wander through the counterbalance for Samhain by discussing Walpurgisnacht and Beltane. We're going to get into the raw edge of these two celebrations and walk straight through the thinning veil. I'm really excited for this one. Whether you're a solitary or group practitioner, brand new to the path, or simply finding your way back again, you're welcome here. There are nights in the calendar year that don't sit quietly. They don't wait to be noticed, and they certainly don't ask to be handled gently. Walpurgisnacht and Beltane arrive with presence. Loud, physical, and a little wild if you're paying attention. Fire shows up first. Not the soft glow of a hearth, but bonfires built to be seen, to be gathered around, to pull people out of their homes and into shared space. Passions and energies seem to rise with the flames as the celebrations get underway. Drumming carries across the fields and hills. Feet move with rhythms long thought forgotten. Laughter gets louder as the night deepens. Lovers find themselves entwined in hidden glens. Winter doesn't get a polite farewell here. It gets burned off, shaken loose, and left behind. Historically, Walpurgisnacht moves through layers of Germanic and Central European folklore long before it ever takes on a Christian name. At its oldest roots, it sits in the turning of spring. Fires on hilltops, noise meant to break the lingering hold of winter, and communal gatherings that marked this as a night when the ordinary order of things loosened. Later, it became associated with Saint Walpurga, an 8th century Anglo-Saxon abbess and missionary who traveled into what is now Germany to help establish and strengthen Christian communities. She was known for her healing reputation and for being invoked as a protector against illness and, over time, against witchcraft. Her feast day falls on May 1st, and the night before, Walpurgisnacht, became layered into existing spring rites, creating a blend of older seasonal celebrations and newer religious framing. That overlap is part of why the night also became tied to stories of witch gatherings and revelry. In folklore, it is imagined as a time when witches meet on mountaintops, when the boundary between the human world and the unseen feels thinner and more permeable. Whether taken literally or symbolically, it carries the sense of a world briefly out of alignment in a way that invites both caution and celebration. That feeling of convergence shows up again in literature, where the world itself seems to tilt into something stranger and more charged. Shakespeare's Macbeth captures this especially well. The opening scenes with the witches on the heath set the tone for a reality where fate, intention, and unseen forces all seem to overlap in uneasy proximity. It is not just that magic is present, but that perception itself becomes unstable, and the boundaries between choice and inevitability begin to blur in ways that echo the spirit of this night. Beltane occurs around May 1st to 2nd, rising alongside the frenzies of Walpurgisnacht through Gaelic tradition. It is preserved in early medieval sources like Sanas Cormac and carries a very different kind of fire than the liminal uncertainty of late winter. This is not fire as warning or warding, but fire is purification, transition, and continuation. It marks the turning of the pastoral year in a way that was deeply practical before it was ever symbolic. Cattle driven between twin fires to protect them from illness and misfortune, hearths extinguished and then relit from a communal flame to carry shared continuity into the months ahead. Homes and thresholds physically reset as people stepped into the next cycle of survival and growth. At its core, Beltane was about movement into life at full volume. This is part of the tradition that later retellings often soften or sanitize for those with delicate constitutions, or to make it child-friendly. But in its original context, it was unapologetically embodied. It was a night where life asserted itself without hesitation or abstraction. It was fertility, fecundity, sex, and celebration. People danced, they gathered, they paired off, they made agreements. Some spoken as commitment, some understood as passing, some deliberately framed as lasting only a year and a day. A rhythm that acknowledged both desire and impermanence without forcing either into permanence they couldn't sustain. There was a loosening of social rigidity, but not absolute chaos. More like a controlled opening. Just enough space for instinct, attraction, and vitality to move through the community without being entirely contained by structure. Fertility in this context wasn't metaphorical or distant. It was immediate. It was lived in bodies, in consensual relationships, in the continuation of households and lineages, and the very practical fact of survival carried forward through time. No one needed to over-explain it or elevate it into philosophy. It was understood in the simplest way possible. This was life continuing itself, visibly and without apology. What sharpens this moment even further is where it sits within the turning of the year. Not as an isolated celebration, but as part of a larger conversation the seasons have been holding long before any of us thought to name it. Beltane and Walpurgisnacht rise on one side of the wheel, bright, loud, and impossible to ignore, while across from them sit Samhain and winter nights, quieter in tone, but no less powerful in its pull. One does not replace the other. They answer each other. Samhain draws the eye toward what is past. Ancestors are remembered, doors close, the land pulls inward, and there is an honesty to that stillness that does not try to soften the edges of loss. It asks for reflection without distraction, for sitting with absence in a way that most modern spaces do not encourage. There is weight there, but also clarity, a kind of stripped-down awareness of what remains when everything unnecessary falls away. Winter Nights recognizes the final harvest, the moment where the land is put to rest for the winter and the people begin to rely on the fruits of that harvest in the long months ahead. Standing here at the edge of May, the energy shifts in a way that feels almost like a response spoken in a different language. Beltane does not deny what Samhain holds. It does not attempt to erase it or move past it too quickly. Instead, it meets it with something equally true, where one says, "Remember what has been lost." The other answers, "Remember what is still here." Not gently, not quietly, but fully, with heat in the blood and breath in the lungs and movement that refuses to stay contained. One honors the dead, the other insists on life. The balance between them is not neat or polite. It is visceral. At Samhain, the veil thins in a way that invites the past forward, allowing space for memory, grief, and connection with those who came before. At Beltane, that same thinning opens in the opposite direction, not toward endings, but toward possibility. Spirits feel closer, yes, but so do the living forces that drive growth, desire, creation, and the kind of wild momentum that does not wait to be organized before it begins. Fire becomes the language of that moment. Not the controlled hearth fire of winter, but something larger, something meant to be seen from a distance, something on the verge of becoming uncontrolled. Bonfires lit across hillsides, people gathering not in quiet reflection, but in shared presence and unrivaled joy. Drums carrying rhythm through the dark while bodies move in response rather than restraint. There is a reason cattle were driven between fires during this time, a reason homes were cleared and new flames kindled. Fire does not only illuminate, it transforms. It burns off the old and makes way for rebirth. It marks a crossing. In that crossing, the boundary between what is human and what is other begins to blur just enough to be noticed. Folklore surrounding Walpurgisnacht speaks of spirits moving freely, of witches gathering, of unseen presences traveling the same roads as those still living. Beltane, in its own way, carries that same awareness, though it expresses it differently. The land is not quiet, and neither are the beings tied to it. The Fae, the Vanir, the old gods, all feel nearer, not necessarily because they have arrived, but because attention has shifted just enough to perceive them. This is not a time for shrinking back. It is a time for participation, for stepping into the current rather than observing it from a distance. The fertility rites, so often softened or sanitized in modern retellings, were never subtle to begin with. They were embodied, lived, acted out in ways that tied human experience directly to the cycles of the land. Couples pairing for a year and a day, promises made under open sky, desire acknowledged as part of the same force that brings crops to life and animals to birth. None of this exists in opposition to Samhain. It exists because of it. Life answers death, not by denying it, but by continuing anyway. By growing, by reaching, by risking, by choosing to engage fully with what is here while it is here. Standing between those 2 points in the year, it becomes easier to understand that neither one tells the whole story on its own. One teaches how to release, the other teaches how to claim. One asks for stillness, the other demands movement. Together they create a rhythm that feels less like a cycle you observe and more like something you move within, whether you realize it or not. Both of these points in the year carry something deeper than celebration or seasonal change. They exist in that in-between space that doesn't quite belong to one side or the other. Beltane and Walpurgisnacht sit at a threshold, and thresholds have a way of shifting how everything feels when you step into them. The edges of things stop behaving as firmly as they usually do. What is normally separate begins to overlap just enough to be noticed. In Celtic tradition, this is often described as the thinning of the veil, though that phrase can sometimes make it sound more dramatic or literal than it needs to be. From a broader pagan or animist perspective, it feels less like something lifting and more like something loosening. Awareness moves differently here. The space between what is seen and what is sensed becomes more permeable, less defined, and far easier to cross without realizing you've done it. Historically, this was a time when people paid attention to that shift rather than dismissing it. The presence of ancestors felt closer, not in a way that demanded spectacle, but in a way that invited acknowledgement. Gods and goddesses were not distant figures tucked safely into stories. They were part of the landscape, part of the moment, part of what was unfolding in real time. Other beings were recognized as well, not as fantasy, but as coexisting presences that shared the same ground from a slightly different angle. That includes the Fae, though not the softened, decorative version that tends to circulate now. Older folklore treats them with a great deal more caution and respect. These are land-connected beings, tied to place, to boundary, to the spaces where things meet and overlap. The She, Seelie and Unseelie, Ljósalfar and Svartalfar, Nisa, Tomta, and other beings found in myths and folklore. Offerings were given not as worship in the way many people think of today, but as acknowledgement, a recognition that the land is not empty and never has been. People understood the importance of boundaries in that relationship, knowing when to step forward and when to hold back, especially on nights where the lines were already shifting. Fire once again becomes central in this space, though its role deepens beyond warmth or celebration. It acts as a point of definition, a way of marking where you stand when everything else feels like it could blur. Bonfires were not only communal gathering points, they were anchors, light against dark, heat against the cool night air. Something steady in the middle of a moment that was anything but still. To stand near a fire on a night like this is to place yourself deliberately, to say without words, this is where I am, this is where I stand, even as everything around me moves. There is a kind of awareness that comes with that, one that doesn't ask for fear, but does ask for respect. Liminal spaces are not chaotic, but they are active. They invite attention. They reward those who move carefully and notice what is shifting around them. On nights like Beltane and Walpurgisnacht, that awareness becomes part of the experience itself, woven into the firelight, the movement, and the quiet understanding that you are not standing in that moment alone. When the season is viewed through a heathen lens, the current running beneath it does not feel subtle, and it certainly does not feel restrained. It aligns most naturally with the Vanir, whose presence carries fertility, wealth, desire, and the kind of embodied power that refuses to stay theoretical. This is not distant symbolic energy. It is lived. It is physical. It is the pulse of life moving through the body and the land at the same time. Freyr stands at the center of that current, not as a passive figure of gentle harvests, but as raw, generative force. His associations with fertility and prosperity are not quiet blessings handed down from afar. They are active, insistent, and tied directly to the success of the land and those who depend on it. In sources like in Lingasaga, within the Heimskringla, he is remembered as a bringer of peace and plenty, a god whose presence ensured good seasons and thriving communities. That kind of reverence does not come from distance. It comes from results, from fields that grow, from animals that bear young, from people who survive and continue. He is growth that cannot be contained. Heat rising through soil, the undeniable presence of life demanding continuation. He is the reason seeds do more than sit dormant. He is the force that insists they break open and surge upwards. Freya meets that energy without yielding to it. Her presence does not soften or temper the moment, it sharpens it. Desire, attraction, agency, these are not passive qualities in her hands. They are chosen, directed, and fully owned. The prose Edda does not present her as someone who waits to be claimed. She moves with intention, takes lovers on her own damn terms, and sets the boundaries of her own experience without apology. Placed into this time of year, her energy feels less like something to admire and more like something to recognize within yourself and let it out. Beltane does not belong to restraint. It belongs to active choice, to the freedom to reach for what is desired and to define that desire without outside permission shaping it first, but always with mutual consent. Njörður, father of Freyr and Freya, adds another layer to this current, one that often gets overlooked when the focus stays only on land fertility. As a god tied to the sea, wealth, and the steady movement of tides, he brings rhythm into the equation. There is a sensuality to the ocean that mirrors this season. Pull and release, approach and retreat, a constant motion that never sits still. The filling of the soil with nutrient-rich waters encourages the very growth that his children represent. His presence reminds you that abundance is not only grown from the soil, it flows, it shifts, and it returns again and again in cycles that definitely do not need to be forced. And then there is Heimdallr, whose role is often framed through watchfulness and guardianship, yet whose origin carries something far more layered. In the poetic Edda, particularly Voluspa, he is said to be born of 9 mothers, beings connected to the sea, to waves, to the edges where one state becomes another. There's something undeniably liminal in that, something that ties him directly to thresholds like this one. He stands at the boundary, yes, but he is also shaped by it. A figure formed through multiplicity, through convergence, through forces that do not simplify themselves for comfort. He is sensuality and masculinity wrapped in raw power just like his brothers, capable of holding the boundary lines all on his own. Odr, the often elusive counterpart to Freya, brings a different kind of presence into the mix. His name carries meanings tied to mind, inspiration, even a kind of ecstatic movement of thought and spirit. He's not always present in the stories, and that absence becomes part of his character. Movement, wandering, the pull towards something just out of reach. His connection to Freya suggests a pairing that is not rooted in possession, but in motion. Desire that is not fixed, but alive. He is the primal, sensual words spoken in a lover's ear before lips meet skin. He is desired, missed, searched for in a way that no others have inspired. His passion and magnetism are a driving force that balances well with Freya's flaming sexuality. Taken together, these figures do not create a soft or orderly picture of the season. They create something far more visceral. This is virility at its fullest expression. Not just male, not just female, but the dynamic interplay between them. The push and pull, the choosing and being chosen, the freedom to engage with that energy without shame or apology. Beltane does not ask for restraint. It asks for presence, for awareness of the body as part of the same force moving through the land, for the understanding that desire, when held with intention and respect, is not something to suppress, but something to work with. There is power in that, real power, the kind that does not need to be softened to be accepted. There's a tendency, especially in modern spaces, to either soften this part of the year into something polite and symbolic, or swing the other direction and turn it into performance, something curated, aesthetic, and just a little disconnected from its roots. Neither of those really captures what this time was, or what it still has the potential to be if you meet it where it actually lives. Originally, this wasn't something people stepped into for an evening and then neatly set aside. It was woven directly into the realities of survival. Cattle were moved to higher pastures because they needed grazing. Fields were turned and prepared because food did not appear without effort. Fires were lit not only for beauty, but because they marked a true transition point. Old cycles closing, new ones beginning, and a community stepping forward together whether they felt ready or not. Within that framework, everything else unfolds in a way that feels far less separate than we tend to make it now. The dancing, the drumming, the laughter that carries late into the night, the pairing off beneath open skies, none of it existed outside of daily life. It was part of it. A recognition that survival is not only about endurance, but about continuation in its fullest sense. Fertility in this space stops being an abstract idea and becomes something immediate and embodied. It lives in the body just as much as it lives in the soil. The same force that pushes green shoots through the earth shows up in the choices people make, in attraction, in connection, in the willingness to reach for something that extends beyond the self. Promises made for a year and a day, connections formed without the expectation of permanence, moments of closeness that existed because the season allowed for them. All of it speaks to a culture that understood life does not wait to be perfectly arranged before it begins. There's something deeply honest in that. It does not ask for perfection. It does not wait for certainty. It moves forward anyway, carrying both intention and instinct in equal measure. This is what gives the season its moment. Not a single act, not a single ritual, but a collection of choices and actions that all point in the same direction. Toward growth, toward connection, toward continuation. Life choosing again and again to continue. What connects all of this, Walpurgisnacht, Beltane, the Vanir, the thinning veil between worlds, is the recognition that this is not a passive doorway in the year's turning. It doesn't sit quietly waiting to be crossed. It moves, it hums, it responds. This is a threshold that asks to be met halfway, not through spectacle or elaborate ritual, but through attention. Through the quieter discipline of noticing what is already changing in you while the outer world shifts alongside it. This is about how you enter the next stretch of time, what you choose to carry with you when everything is in motion, and what you allow to fall away without argument. There is a kind of honesty demanded here. Not dramatic confession, but a clear-eyed willingness to see what still belongs in your hands and what has already turned to ash in the firelight. Some things don't need ceremony to release. They only need recognition that they're finished. Where Samhain teaches the art of letting go, of standing with endings and learning how to make peace with what no longer continues, this season teaches something different. It is the counterbalance, the return swing of the cycle. It teaches how to begin again without apology or hesitation. Not as an idea, not as intention alone, but as something embodied, felt in the body, grounded in action, carried forward step by step into the living world. A beginning that doesn't ask permission because it is already happening. Not every sacred moment asks for stillness. Some of them refuse it outright. They don't settle into silence or contemplation. They gather momentum instead, pulling you forward whether you feel ready or not. Some moments ask for movement, for heat, for breath that is a little faster than comfort allows, for stepping into something that feels a little less controlled, a little less carefully contained, and a little more alive than usual. This is one of those moments. It doesn't arrive politely, and it doesn't wait for perfect clarity. It meets you at the edge of what you already know and asks what you're willing to do with what's left when certainty stops being the guiding force. And it has always been waiting there, at the edge of the fire, not as a threat, not as a test, but as an opening. Thank you for sitting with me today. Next time, we'll turn our thoughts back towards Jotun genealogy while we continue wandering through Norse mythology. My lovely little heathens and heathen friendlies, have a beautiful week as we approach the bonfires of Walpurgisnacht in Beltane. Enjoy the increasing sunshine and the feel of the veil thinning. Watch out for those fairy rings as well as sexy men and women asking for a dance. Saying yes might carry the night a little longer than you expected. Remember your connection to the divine. And in the middle of everything swirling through the world right now, don't forget to find your sacred breath.